Heuristics and biases. So here is the outline. We continue our discussion of the characteristic of system one. We talk about the kinds of so-called heuristics, the rule of thumb that system one used to arrive at decision. And also we discuss four main important cognitive biases that prevent us from making optimal decisions. So characteristics of system one. System one is biased to believe and confirm. It is quite quick to jump to conclusions. And it's also interesting to see that system one usually have conclusion first, and then they try to figure out the argument. And also, it uses simple heuristics to make decisions. So heuristics is a common term in decision theory. It's just simplifying strategies or rule of thumb that help making decisions. Okay. So here are some kinds of rule of thumb that system one use to arrive at decision, or say some heuristics that system one use. So system one usually focus on existing evidence. So looking at what you have and do not think about what it does not see, what it does not have so far. So that means if we are able to focus system one's attention to some important information, it might just take in that information while ignorant of other information. So a phenomenon of this is called what you see is all there is. So that's a description of system one's characteristics. When system one see some evidence, it does not think about the contradicting evidence or the other evidence that might be available if you try to look for it. And also, here is another description of system one. What you are thinking seems to be most important. So this is the so-called focusing illusion. Right? So if you ask people whether they want to live in California, there's a very interesting example and famous example. I mean, people would think about the good things about California, about the good weather, and this thinking about the good feature of California become the most important thing. So when people think about whether they want to move, relocate to California, good weather becomes the most important thing. And they forget about all the other things. And also, when you think about whether you want to purchase a car, and you are really into this fancy, sporty car, and while you are keep thinking about the car, it seems like the most important thing in your life. You ignore that there are other things that you can take care of, and these become your dream. That's how people get addicted to some purchasing behavior, because when they are thinking about purchasing, about the dream car, it becomes the most important thing, and they forget about other things. So one suggestion that I usually give to my student is that when you get frustrated to your life, I mean, you can pay your attention, shift your attention to work, for example. I mean, if you get frustration from your work and think about other important issues, you have family members. The flaw of system one is that when you get some failure in one area, and that become your focus, and you forget about that there are also some other areas that are important and that are also contributing to your happiness of life. It's not the case that when one issue that you are having is failing you, then you cannot have a good life. But that's our failure of system one, the focusing illusion. When you get focused on one thing too much, then you forget about there are other important things in your life. And also system one would try to make judgment based on emotional state. So it exaggerates emotional consistency. So here is one interesting observation. It's called halo effect. The positive impression in one area extends to other areas. So when you like someone, for example, if you like Donald Trump, it's not a good example, but seems for the Trump supporters, when they like Donald Trump, they have the positive emotion toward Donald Trump, and they would think that everything about Donald Trump is good. So that's the working of system one. You try to maintain this emotional consistency. When you have a bad feeling towards some person, and then you look at every behavior of that person as indicating a bad quality towards that person. That's the so-called halo effect. The positive emotion in one area would extend to all the other areas. And also, cognitive ease is one important feature of system one. System one would link cognitive ease to truth, to pleasant feeling, and to reduce vigilance. Right? So these are abstract. I know these are difficult to understand by just listing the descriptions. So we will look at some examples to help you understand these characteristics of system one, these heuristics. So the first thing that's related to this focusing on existing evidence is the framing effect that we already briefly discussed. Framing effect refers to the phenomena that different ways of presenting the same information can lead to different decisions, right? So here is an example. Suppose you have some disease and there's an operation that you can have in order to cure your disease. And if the doctor asks you whether you want to take the operation, if there's a 10% risk of complications, you may say yes or no. Well, on the other hand, the doctor could present you with the same information, but with different framing of the same information. Instead of saying 10% of complications, he says 90% chance of success. Well, if you look at these two presentations of the information, they are exactly the same, but one is focusing on the risk, the other is focusing on the success rate. And it turns out that people are more likely to say yes when it says 90% of success, because 90% of success seems really a high chance of being successful. But if you present 10% of complications, I mean, this risk and complications pop into your mind, that become a really burning issue, right? So you become very concerned about the operation. So that's one example of a framing effect. So here is another example. If you have beef or other meat, it says 80% lean beef. The consumers are more likely to consume it compared to 20% fat beef, even though they are presenting exactly the same information. Okay, because 20% fat focusing on the bad features of beef, while 80% lean focusing on the good features of the beef. So this framing would focus the people on the good features. And here is the same 20% fat versus 80% fat free. Right? 80% fat free seems more attractive to the consumers. So that's the framing. So the original framing effect is just different ways of presenting the same information. Okay, so that's the original framing effect introduced by the psychologist Daniel Kahneman. But broadly speaking, framing effect can be any ways of presenting information, of focusing the readers, the target, on different aspects of the situation. And that would lead to different perceptions and different decisions. So that's the broadly defined framing effect. So here is an illustration of the broadly defined framing effect. So you can consider this framing, the presenting of the information as putting a frame in front of the target. Okay, and then the target can only look at this information within the frame. And what they will do, they will try to complete the picture based on the information they have. Right? So here is the illustration. This person, this target of the one that you want to persuade, they look into this frame or this window, and they look at some trees and the grass, lawns. And they will consider what they see is like a savanna, right? So it's a green area in the wild. But what actually is in reality is actually they just see a part of the whole picture. It just is a part within this concrete big cities. So that is the idea of framing. You put a frame in front of the target and they only see this limited information and they try to picture the whole thing based on the information available to them. And also by giving the target different kinds of frame, I mean, they will have different perceptions, right? So here we have the same city, New York City, here is the Central Park, for example. If they look at only this park, they will picture Savannah. If they look at the buildings, they will consider, oh, it's just a city with buildings. And if they see this buildings with some water, it's actually drained from the faucet, they will think that is a city with the raining season. So that's the effect of framing effect. So when you have different framing of the situation, that would lead to different judgment, and this different judgment will lead to different choice. So here is an example. When you use neutral versus intense frame, then people's perception of the reality will be quite different. So here, when after a car accident, so this is a research, an experiment conducted by psychologists. So they ask some of the observant of the car accident. So if the question, how fast were the car were going when they hit each other, right? So that's one way of asking. And instead, you could also ask almost the same information, just with a different word. How fast were the cars were going when they smashed into each other, right? So you change the word hit to smashed. I mean, the first one is neutral framing. The second one is intense framing. Well, it turns out that this change of word have a great influence on the perception of the observant of the accident. And it turns out that the participant of the experiment, they estimated a higher speed and also reported seeing this broken glasses more often when the word smashed was used, even though there was no smashed window, but they think that they have observed that when the word smash is used. So that's the influence of framing, right? So it caused the change in people's perception and their judgment. And here is an interesting example of framing. It's also, if you work as a waitress in the future, this may help you to increase the sales and maybe a higher tips. So suppose you are a ramen noodle shop and you want to sell ramen noodles. So you could ask, I mean, usually when the customers orders ramen noodle, they can add some add-ons, right? So usually egg is one thing to add on. If you ask, do you want to add eggs to your ramen? I mean, some people might, but if you present this question in a different way, do you want to add 1 or 2 eggs to your ramen? I mean, this framing actually shifts the focus of the customers to the options of 1 or 2 eggs instead of whether they want none or some eggs, right? By the working of system 1, when they are presenting some of the information, they will focus on the information available to them. Not just like the political debate that we mentioned. When they are presenting the question of 1 or 2 eggs, I mean, they are very likely to choose either 1 or 2 eggs. I mean, usually 2 eggs are too much. People would actually just choose 1 egg. If you ask whether they want to ask eggs, I mean, more than half would say they don't. Right? So that's the power of framing. Okay. And the example I mentioned before of my daughter, right? So you frame or say you reframe the situation as an exciting experience rather than falling down and hurtful experience. I mean, that actually changed the perception of my daughter and consider it was fun to topple over with the chair. Also, sometimes, for example, you know, I go to the entertainment park with my daughter. I mean, you know, they are usually reluctant to leave. So the parents usually ask, we need to leave now, or say, we have, do you want to So usually when I say the question that we need to leave, is that okay? We leave now, and usually the answer is no. I mean, there are two ways of reframing the question. It's actually quite effective if you present this as a suggestion without the question mark or asking for opinions of the child. Instead of saying, is this okay, we leave now? You say that, let's go home now. I mean, the second way of presenting this suggestion is more effective because as all human beings, child, they want to seek autonomy. When you ask them a question, they want to show their power, they usually say no. I mean, they are likely to say no. But if you say, as framing is like a suggestion, let's go home now, they are more likely to abide by your suggestion. More likely, but still not easy. The best way probably is to say that, do you want to go home now or 5 minutes later? I mean, they will definitely prefer 5 minutes later. It exhibit their autonomy, right? They think that they have the power to decide whether to go or now or 5 minutes later. So this way of asking satisfying their sense of autonomy, but at the same time, they're more likely to abide by your suggestion that they need to leave soon. So that's also another example of framing. Okay. So far about framing. Let's talk about another features characteristics of system one, which is associated memory and priming effect. It turns out that the memory in our brain works in a fascinating way. So all our ideas in our memory, they are actually linked to many other ideas. So this is the so-called associated memory. We usually link the causes to their effects. Like when we think about a virus, you are more likely to think about its cause or its effect. So here, virus will be causing cold. So after thinking about virus, you are more likely to think about cold or being sick, fever. And we also link things to property. When I present you a line, you are more likely to think about green or sour. And also we link things to category. When you are presented a banana, then you are more likely to think about fruit. And the fruit, the big category, also linked to many other objects in that category. Like after thinking about fruit, then you are more likely to think about orange, apples, all these things. Right? So what is the importance of this associative memory? It means that exposure to a word makes many related words easier to be invoked. And so when you present some concept to people, I mean, the related concept, related idea are more likely to pop into their mind. And these ideas popped in their mind can influence their perception and behavior. So this is the so-called priming effect. Exposure to one stimulus influences a response to a subsequent stimulus without conscious guidance or intention. Right. So here are some examples to fix ideas. Support for education funding is greater when polling station is in a school. Okay, so think about the rational decision maker. If people are rational, where they make decision should not influence the actual choice they have. But it turns out that when this polling station is located in a school, then when you are surrounded by some school children in the environment of school, then the importance of education come into your mind. And then you are more likely to think that's important, and you are more likely to vote for yes for more fundings for education. Right? And then quite fascinating phenomena. It has been shown by some experiment that playing French songs make people more likely to buy French wine. Similarly, if you play German songs in this wine shop, people are more likely to purchase German wine. And we also observe that money primes individualism. So if you, for example, in an experiment, you see the dollar sign or you see the pictures of money, then the decisions made by the participant are more likely to be selfish and independent. And also, lying increases preferences for cleansing products. So when you lied, I mean, the idea of lying would be related to pollution, right? And pollution would cause you to think that you need to clean yourself. So this is a quite interesting observation. And also depending on the way you lie or how you lie, the products you prefer also differ. If you lied on the phone, then later you will prefer mouthwash. If you lie by email, so you just write something, then you are more likely to prefer soap. You're likely to wash your hands because you think your hands are polluted by the misinformation or the lies that you send. So exposures to words and photos of achievement also increase achievement-related thoughts, productivity, and willingness to keep working on a assigned task. Right. So one suggestion that you could have is have a picture like this in your desk. I mean, when you look at someone else to try their best to work towards their goals, I mean, this priming effect will actually help you to work harder. So this has been shown to have a positive effect. So now you might be thinking about the positive thinking I asked you in yesterday's lecture. Do you think positive thinking would have a great influence on your success? I mean, looking at the priming effect, the answer might be yes. Right? So thinking about some positive aspect of achievement of hard working might lead you to work harder. So that's the implication of priming effect. But to the question of whether positive thinking can be helpful for your success, it's a complicated idea, which we'll leave it to the end of this lecture. So the answer is complicated. You cannot get a very simple yes or no. But by priming effect, it may have some positive implication. Now, something related to the priming effect is the so-called ideomotor effect. So this can be considered as a priming effect where an idea influences actions. So the conventional classical priming effect is referring to one idea would lead to a similar idea so that you will respond to the stimulus in a different way. Well, ideomotor effect is actually extend priming effect, saying that some ideas you have can influence your action. And the reverse is also true. You're taking some action might also influence your idea or your perception. So what is more accessible in mind becomes more probable in action. And what action you are taking would also, on the other hand, make this relevant idea to be more accessible in your mind. So this is the idea of ideomotor effect. So an experiment has been conducted to show that people primed to think of old age tend to act old. So the experiment went like this: you gather some undergraduates to a room, and they will answer some questions, right? So basically, some people would give you the idea that they write some adjectives, some words related to old age, and the other group they write something else. I mean, they could write some words with the young age or something irrelevant to age. And it turns out after the experiment, the purpose of the actual experiment is actually to observe the behavior after finishing this word exercise. And it has been observed that after finishing the exercise with thinking about the old age, the students, they actually get out of the room slower and they walk slower and they act slower. So that is the idea. When you think about the old age, then you are more likely to act old. And also acting old encourage the thought of old age. So that's the ideomotor effect and this reverse ideomotor effect. Here is one interesting experiment. Changing facial expression can change emotional states. So this ideomotor effect can actually happen outside of conscious awareness. So here is an experiment. So these participants were asked to read a comic strip and to rate how funny the corresponding comic strip is. And the interesting part of the experiment is that the participants were asked to actually bite a pen and using different positions. So here you see the participants were just asked to bite the pen like this, and then you have to bite the pen with a smiling face. And then if you bite it horizontally, here your facial expression is more likely to demonstrating a smile. Right? And as it turns out, if the participants were asked to bite this pen horizontally, it's more likely they are showing a smile. I mean, they rate the funniness of the comic strip much higher than the other participants. So that's one demonstration of this ideal motor effect. Questions so far? Everything makes sense? Good to know. And now, talking about the ideal motor effect, it's also interesting to see sometimes our system one have this misattribution of arousal. So many stimuli have a similar physiological symptoms, both fear and romantic arousal leads to increased blood pressure and shortness of breath. Right? So our system one sometimes cannot identify the source of this arousal. System one can make mistakes in assuming what causes the arousal. So here is an interesting experiment called suspense bridge experiment. So basically, we have female experimenters ask some potential participants on the bridge, ask them to answer some survey questions, right? And the locations of the survey of the response is different. One is on the stone bridge, is very stable. The other group would be on a suspension bridge. Right? And it turns out that after finishing the survey, the experimenter actually gave the contact information to the responder and asked them that they could call if they have any questions. Right? And it turns out that the male respondents, and then the target, the main purpose of the experiment is to see the response rate, the calling rate of the male respondent to call this a female experimenter. And it turns out that the same female becomes more attractive when meeting on suspension bridge. Why is this the case? Thinking about what we are discussing on this slide, misattribution of arousal. And also here is what system one actually can make mistake. Can you have an interpretation of this phenomenon? We have three hands.
Yeah. All right.
Go first.
Well, it says that both fear and romantic arousal lead to increased blood pressure or shortness of breath. So I think that the fear that one experiences on the bridge might, well, it leads to these effects, right? And these effects, again, allow for an easier pathway towards feeling this romantic arousal. Similar to the previous slide, where someone would have, enjoy the comic strip more than others if they would smile, for example. Something I do question though is the stone bridge. Couldn't it have been that people on the stone bridge were simply doing something else? Because on the suspension bridge, I assume that people would be there for their enjoyment, right? So yeah, in a very relaxed attitude, perhaps, or like fearful, but you have more room and space for, thinking about these kind of things, whereas someone on the stone bridge might be walking to work.
So that's a quite interesting observation. So in psychology experiment, while they are conducting the experiment, they try to control many factors to be similar to each other as possible. But sometimes it's difficult to make them exactly the same. So in situation like this, they could use some collecting information, like what's the purpose of what they are doing now, what is purpose of their trip, or why they are there, in order to control for the factors that you were mentioning, right? So that's a very good observation, because we do see that the replicability of some of the psychology experiment are not that high, because it might be caused by some other factors. So that's something that we'll discuss more. But what you were talking about, this misattribution of arousal, is exactly correct. So here, to add more information, we did find that this howling of the females, they usually ask for some information related to the survey, but the male also asks whether they want to have a cup of coffee. Right? So it's related to some romantic connection. Right? And the call rate for the stone bridge definitely is much lower. It's not zero, but the contents of the call is similar. So we just, based on the information we have, right? So this is some evidence of misattribution of arousal. Whether other factors are playing, you can read the original paper to see whether they have been controlling for the other factors, right? This is just initial evidence. Sometimes you need to have more experiment conducted to rule out some other factors that you were mentioning. So anything to add to that?
I'm thinking about the same. Maybe like the shortness of breath, blood pressure, low increase, and maybe it got misinterpreted.
Yeah.
Yeah. In the that's it.
So yeah, that's basically what we are saying. It's a very correct observation. So when you have the shortness of breath, this high increased blood pressure, our system one will try to attribute this arousal to different sources, and sometimes they make mistakes, right? So when in front of you is a beautiful lady, even though on a suspension bridge, you have some fear, but sometimes our system one cannot attribute this arousal to the fear, but they are likely to attribute this arousal to this factor right in front of you. And they considered this as some romantic connection with a lady in front of you. So that's this misattribution of arousal. Okay, so that's priming effect, ideal motor effect, and misattribution of arousal. So the next and quite important feature or heuristics that system one uses, cognitive ease. Cognitive ease meaning is some information that's easy for your brain to process. You don't need to take a hard time to understand the corresponding information, and that means the information would be related to your cognitive ease. So cognitive ease leads to belief, good moods, trust, and superficial thinking. On the other hand, cognitive strain would cause suspicion and the use of system two. So if you want the target of your persuasion to take in your information, I mean, you want to present the information that is consistent with the target's cognitive ease. So make the information easy to process will be more likely to make the target receptive to your information, because in that case, they will use system one instead of using this suspicious system two, right? So here is a graph from the book by Daniel Kahneman. So how this cognitive ease is related to our other feelings. When you have repeated experience, when you have a clear display, when you have primed idea, when you have a good mood. So all these things are related to cognitive ease. And when you attach cognitive ease to the corresponding information, then this information will feel familiar, feels true, feels good, and feels effortless. And one direct application of the concept of cognitive ease is this mere exposure effect. Repeated experience leads to affection, right? So what is repeated is considered true, important, and good. So an interesting experiment conducted in student dormitories. I know that in Denmark, there's no student dormitory. the student usually just live in the city and just commute to the university. But in the United States and in many other countries, there's student dorm. And the researchers actually try to investigate the relationship and the friendship between different people. And they find that the most important predictor for two people being friends with each other is the distance of the room. Why is that the case? Well, it's because that when your rooms are close to each other, then you see each other more often. And what you repeatedly see will be considered at least safe, right? So thinking about our evolutionary past in the tribal area is full of uncertainty and danger. So what you see repeatedly, meaning that it's safe, meaning that at least it will not attack you. So you have seen it for many times. If you are still safe, that means in the future you are still safe. So this repeated exposure to something would actually get this good feelings towards that thing or that person. And then it would cause some connection. Here is a quite interesting video clip, again, from the movie Focus. So that's see that if you have time, borrow the DVD or watch it on Netflix. It's a quite interesting movie directly related to our course. So here demonstrate this mere exposure effect. Maybe let me give you some. Yeah, let's watch. Okay, well, watch it for a short period, and I'll give you more background. There you go. The problem, my friend, it goes to like the game player and we're off the field now. Guess nothing. Just like 100 to 1. But I see to none. It's fucking crazy. I don't like it. Okay. I'll see it for you. You pick the player. Show this to and also this, there's some missing information. So basically, there's a businessman, it's a very rich man, a Chinese guy, and so who is very into that. So Will Smith went there to bet with him several rounds and lost several rounds. I lost a huge amount of money, and it seems like Will Smith was desperate. He was a con man, and with this lady working together, but the lady was actually in dark what was going on. So it seems that Will Smith was desperate and he wanted to make the final bet so that he will be able to win back all the losses and also earn some additional gain. And the businessman was thinking that he was crazy, but he was proposing that this businessman to pick a number of the players and he will guess the number. And if he gets the correct number, he will win the bet. Right? And even later, he actually proposed that his supposedly girlfriend to bet this number. I mean, the businessman, the Chinese guy, was thinking that he was crazy. There's no chance, right? He mentioned that it's 1 out of 1,000 chance, but he eventually did it. How? Here is the revelation of the secret. And as you can see, it's actually related to this cognitive ease and near exposure effect. That is hotel room. It's saying 55 all day on the elevator. Even stiff man on the doormat. Not only that, we go in the hotel. They looks out the window, arms are everywhere.
He doesn't see it, but he does. There's no getting around it. Even sees product. And it's not only what he sees, what he hears. The Mandarin word for five is wu. There are 124 wu-wus in sympathy for the devil. Registering, but it's all there. So he picks up the pockets, looks up in the field, is it familiar face or the number 55 on it jersey? It's a little voice in the back of his mind says, that's it. And he thinks it's intuition. He picks. And he wanted to write it down. You being in the dark, Vincent. You know that little line.
So that's the working of
But it's all there. It's a little.
So this guy is actually the online. So you have to have someone where this for it to work. So this is an illustration of the mirror exposure effect. So does mirror exposure effect or cognitive ease work like this in the movie? I would not suggest you to make a bet of millions of dollars of bet on this, but it does illustrate this idea, right? So when you repeatedly experience something, that thing seems familiar to you and they are easy to pop into your mind and you're more likely to choose them. So this can be illustrated by this back in the 1997, this Mars bar. There's like an energy bar, chocolate bar that give you some energy if you're hungry. So this sales increased without any marketing push. I mean, the company was actually quite puzzled by this because they did not have any campaign, right? What was going on? They suddenly, the sales increased dramatically without the expectation of anyone in this company. And it turns out that this media coverage of Pathfinder landing on Mars boosted the sale, right? So here is the NASA actually launched this Pathfinder on Mars. They transport this Pathfinder on Mars and do some research. And the media, the TVs and the news are all about this Pathfinder and all about Mars. And the consumers, they see the word Mars. And it's registered in their mind, and they repeatedly exposed to the idea of Mars, and it seems very familiar to them, and it seems to be a good choice when they go to the supermarket, when they try to buy something. When they see this word Mars, they automatically and unconsciously have good feelings, and that's why they decide to purchase some Mars bar. Right? So that is how miraculously functioning of the system one. It does not make any sense, but it does happen. It's because of mirror exposure effect and cognitive ease. Yes.
Is it important? Doesn't matter that Mars has a positive connotation to it. Basically, that landing of the rover was like an achievement, right?
That's again a very good question. Do you have some counter example in mind that
I don't know.
I guess this positive connotation is definitely important. We know that if your name is connected to some concept with negative connotation, it might backfire. It may cause other people to have bad impression towards you. So I remember it's maybe Nancy Pelosi, they have some campaign against Donald Trump. And then they have a posters that make America sick again. And they are actually the Democrat, they are standing by this poster, make Americans sick again. I mean, I do not have any data on people's perception towards this, but if you are standing by the word, by the poster, make America sick again, I mean, people would, or at least system one would have a bad impression towards you because you are connecting yourself to sickness, right? And another example is also from politics. This, I think it's a Republican politician. He actually trying to talk about abortion. And during the debate, she mentioned this very cruel scene of the babies get aborted and it's very bloody. After the debate, her support plummeted because this cruel scene seemed to cause bad feeling from the audience. And this audience would subconsciously, at least their system one, attribute this bad feeling towards that politician. Right? So that may be a more direct and concrete example. You do not want to connect your name, your image to something bad. So here, Mars has good connotation, but I think even it has a neutral connotation, at least if it has a repeated exposure to you, it will lead to positive feeling, right? So I hope that partially answer your question. So yeah, repeated exposure usually leads to a good feeling. But the flip side of what we can learn from this is that you do not want to connect your image, your reputation towards something that has a bad feelings, bad connotations.
All right, thank you.
Maybe let me, finish the next slide. A related slide. How to make your message persuasive. We mentioned that repeated exposure, something that is easier to process, would make your system one think is more likely to be true, trustworthy. So here is a lesson that we can learn from the concept of cognitive ease. You can repeat your message because of repeated exposure will lead to cognitive ease and the feeling of being true and trustworthy. And you can maximize the legibility. Make sure that your font is big enough that people can read, and make it rhyme. And something rhyme is easier for the brain to process, and miraculously it make the system want to think that it's more likely to be true, even though it's not, and make it easier to pronounce. Right. So here are some examples. So we have two statements. Adolf Hitler was born in 1892, and Adolf Hitler was born in 1887. Which one do you think is true? Neither of this was true, but
both one is like an accent, so you put more attention to it.
yeah, you pay more attention to it. It feels like, right? So you cannot control it to feel like it's at least truer than the other. Right? So that's cognitive ease. It's easier for your brain to process, and that seems to be truer than the other. Now, here are some statements, some sound that show you the wisdom. So it says, "Walls unites foes." Okay. Rhymes, it feels like acceptable or trustworthy. And little strokes will tumble great oaks. A fault confessed is half redressed. So you see all these sounds that you heard, they seem to contain wisdom in it. And part of your belief that there's wisdom is because it rhymes. So let's compare the same sentences without the rhyming. So walls unite enemies is express exactly the same information as the first sentence, but it does not feel easy to process. It does not feel that exciting for you to read this. Little strokes will tumble great trees. A fault admitted is half redressed. Right? So these three sentences feel more acceptable compared to the last three because of the rhyming. And rhyming make the information easy to process. and make your system want to think they are trustworthy and make the readers more receptive to the corresponding information. Okay. And the last one, make it easy to pronounce. It actually have some really financial implications that cause a big stake with big stakes. So here is a research conducted about this share values, share price after a public traded company after the IPO, initial public offering. So the initial value of shares is greater if company's name or stock ticker code was easy to pronounce. So here is an example of how a pronounceable and unpronounceable stock ticker. The first one, PAR, is very easy to pronounce, while PXG is difficult because you don't know how to pronounce this unless you just spell out all the 3 letters. And now here are the implications of whether your name, the name of your company or the ticker are pronounceable or not. So the first one, the top graph represents the 2 different group of companies after their initial public offering, with names pronounceable, company names pronounceable or unpronounceable. So you see that after 1 day, the pronounceable company names would lead to a higher share price. Right? So this is the percentage change. Right? After the first day, the pronounceable companies, they are like 13% higher than the original price, while the unpronounceable companies, they are less than 10%. You might think that the difference is not that dramatic, but consider we are not looking at the fundamentals of the corresponding company. We are only looking at the names and whether the name, not just the name, but whether the names are just pronounceable or not, or easy to pronounce or not. And this difference even continue after 1 year, right? And even more dramatic is when we look at whether the tickers of the corresponding stocks are pronounceable or not. For example, PAR or PXG. And this difference is even more dramatic, right? So it's continued even after 1 year, and it's more systematically different compared to the company names. So that's how cognitive is, and pronounceability will lead to, even in financial market with really big stakes, right? Without looking at the fundamentals, the workings, the functioning of the company, the business of the company, we just look at whether the names or the tickers are pronounceable or not. That would actually lead to different share price change. Why is this the case? Because when the customers, they try to purchase stock, I mean, when they see 2 tickers, one is pronounceable or the other is not, they are more likely to choose the pronounceable ticker, right? And that leads to the corresponding increase in price. Okay, so let's use the last 20 minutes to finish cognitive with one last example, and also talk about some of the common cognitive biases about system building. So here is an interesting case of O.J. Simpson. So if you are familiar with O.J. Simpson, he was a famous baseball player, had a lot of money, and he was actually accused to kill his wife and supposedly his wife's boyfriend, and it turned out it's not her boyfriend, ex-wife, I should say. And then here in the court, the police give a pair of gloves that was supposedly to be used by O.J. Simpson and to use a bat to hit the wife and the other man. And these gloves seems too small for him, right? And most people thought that O.J. Simpson to be guilty, but here is actually the last defense by O.J. Simpson's lawyer, Hopper. And let's just learn from this very strong statement and defense to see what principles were applied in this final statement to make it a more persuasive and convincing.
I think it was it. Let me say that not one bit of domestic violence is taught. O.J. Simpson is not proud of some of the things that happened during his marriage. Does that have to murder? Mr. Dunn talked about 1985. But he missed the whole point. Something interesting happened in 1985. Mark Furman responded to a call on a rocket. He saw a white woman married to a powerful black man. He went, that's in the hardened racist. Mark Furman is the one who said, if I see an interracial couple, if the reason, something, so you have a lying mark, personification of evil who found the gloves. Don't be fooled. This isn't just one office. Mark represents the entire LAPD. Now, you may not know this, but you are in power. Your decision has a major implication both in this court and outside. Things happen for a reason. Maybe that's why we're gathered together. Something in your background, your character, wants you to know that this is wrong. Maybe you're the people at the right time to be able to say, no, we can't have this. What they have done is disgraceful. O.J. Simpson is entitled to it. They have entrusted this case to a man who says he'd like to see all the niggas gathered together and killed the genocide. That man speaks like Adolf Hitler. Now, since you can't trust the man and you don't trust the people, is it any wonder in the defining moment in this trial when they asked O.J. Simpson to try on the glove, it didn't fit because it wasn't his. If you don't stop this cover-up, who will? Send them a message. Let them know that your verdict will travel far outside these walls. Ladies and gentlemen, remember these words. If it doesn't fit, you must quit. If it doesn't fit, you must quit. If it doesn't fit, you must quit.
So there are many principles or many lessons we could learn from this final statement. Like try to start with some information that everyone believe is true, which is something that we'll talk about, this so-called APT structure when we talk about persuasion. And also point out the flaws of the other party, like you mentioned the corruption of the LAPD. The evidence was not following the formal procedure. I mean, the gloves were not stored in the formal procedure. That caused some questions towards the trustworthiness of the LAPD. But what I want to point it out is just the last sentence. If it doesn't fit, you must acquit. I mean, this is such a powerful statement, right? So first, it rhymes, make people to think it's more likely to be true. And he's stated not once, but 3 times, repeatedly, to make the judge and the jury to think this is something true. And eventually, the only same thing got acquittal, so to be judged as innocent. And this statement was considered as one important contribution, one important factor that leads to the acquittal of O.J. Simpson. So great video. And after this class, after this course, you might just come back to this statement again, and you can actually learn more because we will cover more principles to make your statement more persuasive. Right? So that is the heuristics and the characteristics of system one. And now let's introduce some common cognitive biases. So we already introduced the concept of biases. It's just systematic and predictable errors in specified circumstances. The nature of system one, and especially the reliance on simple rule of thumb, the simple heuristics, make it prone to cognitive biases. So there are numerous cognitive biases exhibited by system one. In fact, if you Google cognitive biases, you might see a list that's showing all the cognitive bias that has been documented. And you can find that list, I mean, maybe learn from it. So here in this class, we'll just cover the 4 most important biases related to decision and also related to persuasion and negotiation that we want to discuss. So the first one is confirmation bias. The confirmation bias is describing these features of system one to look for evidence that confirms rather than refutes beliefs. So, for example, if you ask the question, is Mark friendly? Then you are more likely, your system one is more likely to seek evidence to demonstrate that Mark is friendly. But if you ask the question in a different way, is Mark unfriendly? Then you intuitively and unconsciously to think about the incidents and the features that prove Mark is unfriendly, right? So there's 2 different ways of asking a similar question would actually lead to slightly different conclusions because of the confirmation bias. People tend to interpret evidence as supporting their prior beliefs. That's one implication of confirmation bias, but not only that, people also look for evidence. They try to actively look for evidence supporting their prior beliefs, right? When they have some evidence, they interpret in a way to support their beliefs, but at the same time, they look for evidence and only evidence supporting their prior beliefs. And here's an interesting observation. Reading the same article, both people who opposed death penalty and those who favored it found it supporting their views. Why is this the case? Well, it's because people interpret evidence as supporting their prior belief, and also when the article is there, they actually look for the evidence at the same time to support their prior beliefs. And you might be thinking that, I mean, if you're smart enough, you may not fall into the trap of confirmation bias, but research has demonstrated just the opposite. People with stronger analytical ability, they are more likely to twist data to strengthen their pre-established opinions. So if you are smart, you're more likely to do this because if you do not have the corresponding skills, you don't know how to so-called interpret or misinterpret the evidence. But if you're smart enough, you know how to twist data, then you are actually more likely to twist the data in a way to support your prior beliefs. So we can say that smart people, they are under certain circumstances, they're more likely to fall into the trap of confirmation bias. Now you might be asking why we have this confirmation bias. Why system one is biased to confirm? What is the functioning of our system one? In order to understand a statement, you have to start with attempt to believe it. Your system will have at least to simulate it, right? For example, if you say that Trump will become the president, I mean, in your mind, system one will try to simulate, try to understand what this sentence means. And in order to try to understand this sentence, you have to simulate this image of Trump being the president, right? So you must know what the idea would mean if it were true. You have to first assume it's true in order to understand it. And if you stop there, then that's the end. You have this statement, you believe it. And you have to become suspicious about the statement, to use your system two to have the second step of thinking about the statement again to refute this statement. Only after you assume it were true to understand it, then you can use your system two to decide whether to unbelieve it. So here is actually a very interesting illustration of confirmation bias. Let's watch this funny video.
This is the venue they chose for their fake auditions for an advert for Lip Balm.
We're hoping that we can use part of this in a national commercial, right? And this is the 10 on lip balms that we have over here. And these are our models. They're going to help us doing that. And we have a leading brand. Would you have any problem kissing our models? So this is a blind test. I'm going to ask you to go ahead and put a blindfold on. Can you see anything? Oh, so you can't even see down. It would blind me like that. Okay. Now what I'm going to be looking for in this test is maybe if you could discern any flavor or not. Have you ever done a kissing test? Cover up big and lean in just a little bit, okay? All right.
So you see the answer to the question, how did that feel? Good. Well, because the ladies had a firm belief that they're kissing these great male models, and all the afterwards evidence they get, the feelings of the kiss, they just interpret that kissing this handsome male model, and this confirmation bias just make them believe that they had great experience, right? Even though it's probably contradicting to what they have perceived, right? So that's a great example of confirmation bias. So here is a comic strip demonstrating one example of confirmation bias. So here you see that this guy see another guy is bad at math and said, wow, you suck at math. But if he saw another girl did not work well on the math problem, he said the girls that suck at math, because he has this pre-existing belief or stereotype that girls are not good at mathematics. So he just interprets, seemingly evidence to this individual case as generalized statement confirming his belief, right? So that is confirmation bias. Now, the second bias is called overconfidence. Overconfidence can be considered as the mother of all biases. Overconfidence is just a direct consequence of system one. You try to look for evidence confirming our overconfidence without considering competing evidence. So this is related to some extent to confirmation bias. Overconfidence is very prevalent, and it makes it hard to detect and correct other biases. That's why it's called the mother of all biases. Because you are overconfident, you don't think you are subject to biases. It's make it difficult for people to correct their potential biases to improve their decision making. So here is an example of this overconfidence exhibited as the optimistic biases, and especially the optimistic biases of entrepreneur. One example of overconfidence. It has been demonstrated by research, by statistics, that self-employment earns lower income compared to selling skills to employers, meaning that if you have a startup, your own business, on average, your earnings is actually worse compared to just work as a regular employee in a company. Right? This is not because we do not have any successful business, it's because most startups fails. What we do observe are the super successful companies that earn a huge oodles amount of money to the founders, but we do not see that a large number, huge number of startups, they actually fail. So here are some statistics. Only 35% of small business survive for 5 years, right? After 5 years, 65% of business, they do not exist in the market anymore. And 60% of new restaurants, they are out of business after 3 years, right? But we still see many new entrepreneurs start up pouring into the market, even after we present these statistics to them. Why is this the case? Even we tell them that if you bet whether startup would succeed or not, the best bet is that it will fail because it's more than likely to be failed. Right? But even being presented with the corresponding statistic that most startups fail, people do not believe the statistics apply to them, and they still want to have their startup. Why is this the case? Well, it's because of the overconfidence of the entrepreneurs, the optimistic bias that they exhibit. They tend to overestimate their relative skill. Okay, so they have this illusion of control. They think that they have strong skills so that they are able to overcome the hurdles to success. But at the same time, they neglect the role of luck and underestimate the obstacles. You think you have skill, and sometimes it's undeniable that the potential founders of the startup, they have strong skill, but you do not think that a lot of other failing startups, they have skillful founders, right? Having strong skill is just one necessary condition for successful business. It's luck, the market condition, what is going on in the international political or geographic tension, all those things can be contributing to whether a company could be successful. That is out of the control of the founders. And also another thing is the competition neglect. The founders have the tendency to neglect the competition from other companies, from other firms. You have a great idea, of course, but have you considered whether other people have similar or even better idea? And most startup companies, when they have a good idea, they think that it will definitely be successful, while ignoring that other people might have the same idea or even better idea. Why don't they succeed? And they don't think about that. So the direct consequence of this optimistic bias of entrepreneurs is access entry. We have more competitors enter the market than it can profitably sustain. Right? So that's also one reason why most startups fails. This access entry is good for the economy because the competition, if you study economics, you will learn that competition is good for the society because the consumers, they are able to purchase the corresponding product at a lower price. That increases their welfare and the total welfare of the society, but it's actually bad for the entrepreneurs and their investors because, they do not consider the potential loss, the potential risk and uncertainty involved in this investment. Right? So here is the detailed statistics of the patterns of failure and success in entrepreneurship. So in order to understand this graph, let's look at the left panel. So this graph represents the sales in 2002 for 510,000 firms founded in the United States in 1986. On the y-axis, it represents the share of firms in each bracket. And on the x-axis, it represents the sales in the 6th year after entry. So here, the biggest bunch, the largest bar is 0. What does this mean? This means more than 50% of the companies, they have 0 sales after in the 6 years or after 5 years, right? And the sales less than 0.1 millions of dollars, that's 10%. And the extremely successful company, which is greater than 10 millions of dollars, I will not say extremely successful, but successful company, they only account for less than 1%, right? So other panel, the panel on the right, demonstrates a similar pattern. So these represent the value of entrepreneurs' equity for this startup founded between 1987 and 2008. Again, y-axis represent the corresponding shares in each bracket, and the x-axis represent the value of entrepreneurs' equity at exit. We will see that almost 75%, 3/4 of all startups, they fail. So after they exit, they have nothing remained. And less than 20%, they are able to get 0 to 20 millions of dollars. And the extremely successful company is very small. It's almost negligible. And here is a comparison of wage versus self-employment earnings. So this solid line represents the distribution of wages for self-employed workers, not the wages, the earnings of the self-employed. Usually you have a startup, and the dashed line represents the distribution of wages of the employees who had a regular job. And as you can see here, we do see there are more people who are self-employed earn a higher earnings compared to the people who earn a wage. But we do see a bunch of people who have a self-employment or startups. They have very little wage. So on average, you will see the wages of regular job actually is higher, is significantly higher compared to having a startup. So what do we could learn from this? I'm not saying that if you have a great idea, you should not consider having a startup. I'm just saying that it's likely that when you have some business idea, you might be over optimistic towards the future, right? Wage, of course, is not the only factor that the successful business entrepreneurs consider, right? So the dream, achieving this dream, create value for the companies, that's maybe even more important consideration than the money there. But what we could learn here from this is that try to understand the reality. Right? Do not be overconfident and overly optimistic so that you do not foresee the obstacles that you will face when you start a company. Right? So that's something you need to learn. Now, I say that most of you are overconfident. Why then are we overconfident? Should we not have a good estimate, understanding of our skills and ability? And that would make our more successful, maybe? Why evolution actually shape our system want to be overconfident? Well, definitely there are corresponding benefits for us to be overconfident. So here are some benefits. It increases our self-esteem and personal contentment and commitment. When you feel good about yourself, when you are confident, then you feel good and you increase your self-esteem. It helps persist at difficult tasks and cope with adverse events. Right? That's also a good thing. When you have a startup, this overconfidence may help you or force you to try harder. And then maybe this additional effort could lead to success. Right? So overconfidence can have a good thing. And also, to see the people who are actually having a good understanding of their ability, they are usually depressed. Only depressed people are not overconfident. So that's demonstrate the importance of being overconfident. So sometimes we can say that being overconfident is healthy and good for your health, at least. But it does impose some adverse effect. Like it has inability to learn from mistakes. As we mentioned, overconfidence is the mother of all biases, because if you are too overconfident, you are ignorant about the bias that you have. It's make it difficult for you to correct all the biases. And it also hit our credibility we sometimes would make less effort on tasks because we think we are definitely be successful on those tasks. We do not need to put too much effort. And also, we could have it could lead to a wasted time and effort on project that doomed to fail. Right? So it's just two sides of the same coin. Sometimes it could make you to try harder, right? Help you to proceed a difficult task, but sometimes it's a stretch. You might also waste time and effort on project that doomed to fail. So let me stop here. And again, I think I get too much time. I should stop the 8 minutes earlier. But I will try to return this time in our future lectures. And we are not able to finish all the material. So tomorrow we will first finish the 2 other common biases, and then we will talk about the elements of influence. We will start to move from decision-making to persuasion and influence.